Hello, I'm Denicia Butte, Community Content Lead at the Cardano Foundation. Welcome to Roundtable Talk number 4 on the topic of Cardano Constitution drafts. This Roundtable Talk is aimed to help you, the Cardano community, better understand what the Cardano Constitution is, why we need it, how we come about the current drafts, what to expect during the Cardano Convention in Argentina and Kenya. We'll also discuss the process for adopting the Constitution. But before we dive into all of this, Beatrice, my co-host, how are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. Thank you for asking. So for those of you who don't know me, I be on Twitter. I'm an ICC member in the Ethic Council, and I'm a Cardano ambassador. And thank you guys so much for coming. I'd like to pass the word to our first speaker today, which is Fred.
Thank you. And thank you everybody for joining. So I promise to be super brief. So this roundtable is really about all of the constitutions, which is right now giving input. And very soon we are going to meet in 2 locations, and we're hopefully going to ratify a first draft of a constitution. Now, why is this so important that we're not just looking at one set, but we look at multiple different angles? Is because blockchain-based systems are complex socio-technical ones. So they have global properties who heavily depend on the collective behavior of many interacting agents. Think about it, right? There's 7 million personas and wallets and people and corporates who interact with Cardano at all given times. And all of them are determined by design choices. And up until now, these design choices has been very much from the federated entities around it. But now this is being handed over as a part of Voltaire. Now, this design involves technical underpinnings, economic incentives, and governance. And they get intertwined. When they get intertwined, we see something. So this is not the first blockchain who's going towards a community-governed system, right? But we also can take experience from other social constructs. So what we observe when we look at the blockchain data is that blockchains are competitive environments where users prioritize profit, even at the expense of system integrity and stability. So what we're doing here today is we're doing twofolds. We're looking at the constitutions in plural, and most of those constitutions have 2 aspects into it. One is design. So basically some very technical, which is about the system integrity. So this is very frequently called guardrails, and they are extremely important. Now, the other part is the social part of it. So how do we trigger behavior? And a blockchain with no people interacting with it has 0 value. So these behaviors are super important for us, and specifically to get it right. So therefore, I'm really excited that many people have spent most of the weekend, but also months and days to get to this point where we're soon going to meet in 2 different places. Unfortunately, it was supposed to be 1, and discuss this. Now, today's discussion is really to look at what is the constitutions, how do we get to one, what's the give and take, and how do we ensure that we both have the design, so the technical design, but also these social constructs into it, without actually basically recognizing that changing this after it's been voted online is going to be quite difficult. And in many voting systems, you vote to stay at the center of where you are today, but not towards change. So that's going to be really interesting to see how we do that here in Cardano, because obviously we have a better design, we have better people, and we have a large opportunity to really change the world when we get this right. So I'm looking forward to follow the discussion, and I will give the word over to Denicio.
Thank you so much there, Fred. Thank you. Next up, I think that's going to be Nicholas J. You're muted. I'm pretty sure Nicholas is currently working on his technical setup. What about Nicholas Cerny? Nicholas Cerny, would you like to take that over? Otherwise,
Yeah, absolutely. No problem at all. I hope you can hear me. Right, this whole constitutional journey, I think it's also important to consider where we are at the moment and where we're headed, right? As of right now, since the Chang 1 hard fork, since the 1st of September, we have a constitution in place on Cardano, and that's the interim constitution. So anybody that queries the blockchain or looks at the Conway Genesis file, and for those that don't know, this is the specifications for different parameters. And in there we have a link and we have a hash of the interim constitution. And that is what's currently in place. And in this interim constitution, in the last sentences of the Appendix 2, it actually says what needs to happen, right? So we have written in there that we need to have a consultation period and a consultation phase with community feedback. And we also have in there that we need to have a constitution in place, or not in place, but being proposed as a governance action before the 31st of January 2025. And then, and that's what I forgot, we also have there that we need to have a convention, a constitutional convention, until the end of the year 2024. So that's why we're going through this whole process right now, right, to go from this interim version to an actual proper constitution. I'm not saying that the interim is not proper, it is exactly what we need right now, but how can we improve that, right? Because governance is all about improvement. And this is where we are at the moment. And this whole process of the workshops, and here really a big shout out to everyone that participated, over 1,400 people in 65 workshops in I think around 50 countries. Thank you to everyone that participated, everyone that worked on this output material, so the civics committee, community members that hosted it, everyone that participated. And right, now what's coming up now is how can we consolidate all of that? How can we make sure that what we're going to propose on chain, right, with the update constitution governance action, which will be only enabled after the next hard fork. And we don't know the name yet of that hard fork. There's an info action currently ongoing. So yeah, just right. So now it's really how do we get to a draft that incorporates as much feedback as possible, and that then ultimately can be approved by the ADA holders, by the DREPs themselves. So just as a framing context, yeah. And this is something that no one has ever done yet in our space. So I think just from a personal perspective, it's amazing and so cool that we do that as a community, as an ecosystem. It is challenging, but with people like all of you here and all of you listening, I'm sure we can do that. And yeah, I think I'm already talking too much, so please, someone else should take it over.
No, you're doing really well. Hey, what I'd love to do is, I'd love to hear from you, Jack. Welcome, by the way. I saw you joined. I'd love to hear from you really, like, how was your experience throughout this whole process? Also from an intersect perspective as well.
Yeah, thanks, Denicio. Thanks, everybody. It's a great panel actually today. This is awesome. I don't know how we're going to get through it. If we can go for 2-3 hours, Denicio, I think we could easily make that time up. Yeah, it's been a journey. I mean, the concept of the Constitution sort of came out 2 years ago, pretty much 2 years ago, I think now. November 2022 was when 694 was published, and the idea of a Constitution alongside, institutions and also democratic consent, the tooling that we have today on chain with Governance Live. Yeah, it's 2 years in the making, and we've had what a year it's been. Just to sort of step back a little bit, actually, and look at everything that's been done in 2024 is the result of previous workshops for the SIP. Obviously, all of the engagement that the SIP got at the beginning, in when it was published in November, and now we're here 2 years later. It's had quite literally thousands upon thousands of hours spent in the whole realm of how we're defining Voltaire, at least at this stage. And so the Constitution for me has been always probably the most interesting. I say the most interesting, all of it's interesting, but it is quite interesting, right? If we're honest about it. We're coming up with a Constitution for a global financial and social infrastructure, for instance, a decentralized community and such a diverse community globally, right? To do that, it's just one ambitious thing to even try to do. I think so. Everyone should pat themselves on the back for that effort. And as you mentioned, Nico, quite rightly, that 1,400 people have been involved just on the Constitution process at our end. What we've been trying to facilitate here at Intersect. And I think this is partly why what we're seeing today is actually just a really expansion of everything that's happened this year already. If we look at the different community versions, and I know Ryan's on the call, which is great, so it'd be good to hear from him because he's put together some amazing threads on all the different contributions from Adam Dean, from Jane, from Kevin. I'm going to miss people, so I don't want to keep going, but apologies if I missed you. But there's tons of contributions to it. The CF, of course, last week added on to the July draft that was published, 4 or 5 months ago, obviously in July. So we've seen this community, an iteration actually is the key word I want to sort of focus on here. That it's been an iterative journey over the 2 years, including everything to do with Voltaire. And we are now where we are, right? With a week to go before the convention, now in Buenos Aires and Nairobi. How we deliver a constitution that is the best, as Fred talked about, which is quite right. How do we get a constitution that we're all happy with, or at least the majority of us are happy with, in Buenos Aires and in Nairobi? And then, of course, it goes on chain, right? So everyone else gets their voice heard again, if they haven't been able to participate, of course, through the workshops as well. So I'm just been in awe of the effort. I've spent many hours reading and thinking about it from my perspective. Obviously, I'm in a unique position because I'm an ADA holder. I've been here for a while. I've got my own views, and I'm with my interset out, and I'm trying to help facilitate a neutral, impartial, unbiased type approach, which I think the Civics Committee have done very well. And I know, Nico, you're on the Civics Committee. Danielle's here as well, which is great because Danielle's been a big part of this. Einstein. Yeah, I mean, it's just been a phenomenal effort. So big thank you from me for what it's worth. And I'll pass it back to you, Denisha, because I can keep going.
Of course, thanks to you. It's always good to have that, perspective as well from people like yourselves, also from Intersect. Just for a moment, Utah, I see you're up here as well. I'd love to hear from you because as a community member, how has your experience been throughout this whole entire process? I mean, you've also contributed, obviously, to this whole process. How has that been?
Hi, I'm Mirza. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, my poor English. My contribution is I hold a Constitution workshop at Tokyo and Osaka, and with socials, and I collect a lot of feedback from that, and I feel that collecting feedback is very difficult. So I think Civic Committee is very awesome work, and a lot of I very happy to see a lot of delegates are gathering Argentina and a lot of discussions. Yes.
Yeah. If you look at because you organized multiple sessions already with Socius. You mentioned with Socius, for example. If you look back at all of those sessions that you've organized, can you pinpoint, let's say, two main, things that happened during those workshops in terms of feedback that really captured your attention?
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Okay, the feedback that you received from those workshops that you organize, what are the two most, let's say, important feedback that you would say that stands out?
Okay, two things is first, more simple. So a lot of people say it's very complicated, a lot of things. So a lot of technical specific words, something like so simplify is first, simplify, and second, maybe a lot of people say about it's we should set something like 405 billion ADA cap should written in Constitution, and that is two things discussed at Tokyo and Osaka, and I think the two things is already reflected at the latest Constitution draft. So I happy with latest Constitution draft. Thank you so much.
That's good. That's good. I'm gonna look now really at you, Ryan, because I know you've obviously done an extensive post when it comes to the different versions of the Constitution. Looked into that, and I'm just gonna build further on what what Utah just said in terms of the need to simplify wording, to simplify the draft. What is your take on that?
Yeah, I think it's definitely like a challenging issue, right? Because I mean, like Jack was saying earlier, we've got thousands of people all over the globe, different cultures, different viewpoints, different languages. How are we going to accurately synthesize all these different opinions and ideas on how the Constitution should be to distill our common values, right? So it's like, we're trying to figure out all the different strategies we could do for this. So like one of the things I did is I collected in a couple different threads all the community drafts I could get, and I put a GitHub repo together, converted them all to Markdown. And we kind of had this last Saturday, Adam Dean led a long constitutional workshop where we went through all the different versions and tried to get through. And I think it ended up being somewhere along 6 hours. I couldn't stay for the whole thing, but it was a lot of great discussion. We produced some good notes for like all the different ways people saw things. And I think it's important to realize that, we all have our different ideas on what the Constitution should be, and no one person is going to get everything they want, right? So we have to find something that's going to have our common values and principles. So like one of the kind of ideas I was thinking as we go through sections is, right, like if there's a section, there's different viewpoints on this section, can it be expanded to include all the different viewpoints? Like, can you broaden the scope of each section? Or is it too broad and perhaps it needs to be narrowed and it could still include all the different viewpoints and opinions? And then maybe there are some times where people have opinions that are in direct conflict, right? So can those sections maybe be omitted if we have different opinions? Like, does it need to be in the Constitution, right? For minimum viable governance, could it be something that could be added later? So it's definitely like a challenge, like an unprecedented thing, right? To have like a Constitution put together on such a global scope for this. And it's exciting to see it coming together too.
But it's not like it's set in stone, because you just mentioned here, like it's what, a living document?
True, yeah. Yeah, it is a living document. And once after the next yet to be named hard fork goes live, we'll have the update Constitution governance action available, and that will require a 75% threshold for DREPs and the ratification by the Constitutional Committee. So there is a bar for it to be changed there. So it's a living document to agree. It can be changed, but there is kind of a threshold there that we have to agree on to make sure it gets passed.
Okay, thank you there. Thank you for that.
you.
I'd love to hear, by the way, from Danielle. Danielle, your perspective. I'd love to hear your perspective on that, especially part of the Constitution and kind of like simplifying it so that the wider community can also understand, and understanding also increases participation. So just hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thanks. I did want to talk about kind of how do we simplify, how do we consolidate all of these different viewpoints. And within the process that's been set up and run through the civics committee, we have created what's called the constitutional delegates. And so everybody who has participated in a workshop will have been part of electing a constitutional delegate, and their role is to represent them. And so what we've done is set up a representative group of the community to then carry the community's voice into the Constitutional Convention. So we are looking to those folks to understand what the community is saying, like what their workshop also was saying, and then look at all of this different feedback that's coming in now and take that into the convention to decide, here's the, and therefore this is the draft that we're happy to approve because it represents such a broad part of the community that we know we've been interacting with. So we've really tried to set up this representative democracy really in a way that helps us get to convergence and not have extreme divergence. So it's a really important piece of the community dynamic to get us to an agreement in December, we hope.
You are muted, Denisio.
Sure, go ahead. Beatrice, sure, go ahead, Beatrice. I'm pretty sure you're bursting with questions as well. So please go ahead.
Yeah, no, I really has been a part of this process. It's been really just to see how much effort that through, and especially with what Danielle was mentioning, all the stages have been worked on in such a big way. I would like to pass the conversation to Eystein and his work.
Hey everyone, love this discussion. So I'm part of the civics committee, and what I would say, like, my main impression is, like, I get almost like goosebumps from the nuances in the different discussions from the different workshops and all of these like aspects we as a whole community, because I do think like 63 workshops is a very good sample of the whole community in terms of what their opinion is. It's over 1,400 attendance as well. So if you look at the interim constitution, it's also there, as Nicholas pointed out. It's supposed to be by the end of December or end of 2024. It says there has to be held a constitutional convention, and then you submit on-chain a governance action before the end of January. Those are our next two steps. And my key takeaways for this, what we're going into now in Argentina, is the same as I said during the Norwegian workshop. It's like we need to acknowledge what is limitations, and we need to acknowledge like what are nuances in terms of how we do things. So what do I mean by that? So take, for example, like enforceability. When we started it, Frederick talked about this being much more than just a blockchain constitution. It's a social constitution as well. It's for a blockchain ecosystem. So some of the things you say in a constitution has to relate to the social functions. And then you have to have mechanisms for enforcing those social mechanisms. Examples of this is like what we call code of conducts, for example. Then it becomes like a question of how much can you actually enforce of this, or versus what is something that you encourage to the community. And the constitution currently is full of these like basically aspirations and recommendations, and that is the social aspect of it. Then you have the guardrails, as Frederick talked about, is sort of like clear. But the problem is they are not always clear definitions. Sometimes there are what you call should, they're not must, and should needs to be related to the rest of the constitution. And this is why one of the big debates is like, should we have the constitution also including the guardrails in itself or not? It's a big difference in terms of size. Like if you have it only the constitution, the draft of the intersect is 9 pages, and for CF it's 13 pages, so quite small. But if you include the guardrails, it's like 37 pages currently. So one of the things we are going to probably discuss is that as well. But what I will end my short segment here is like, I'm so super excited and optimistic about this. Like everything that's come from the community is so valuable, and we definitely acknowledge this need for like shortening and clearing language. I will give an example of that. The Civic Committee really went through the preamble, and I believe we have a version of that's much shorter, and that the delegates really approved, that they liked more this version. And I think structure and fine-tuning the constitution language and size is really important as well. So we'll take that with me to Argentina.
Wow, I love that. Thanks so much there, Eystein, for that feedback. You mentioned terms like enforceability, especially when building, let's say, social functions into the Constitution. And I know we have 2 lawyers here in this call, right? And I don't want to go further without consulting them from a legal perspective. I know Nicholas, Jack Mart, and also Nicola Masella, I'd love to hear from you guys. When it comes to enforceability, can we do that? Can it be done? How should we view this from a legal perspective? Your sound is, you're muted still.
I can go in the meantime. So actually, that's a very important point, Benicio, and I reconnect to what we were saying about keeping the guardrails and the constitution document together. Actually, this is a very important passage in terms of enforceability, in particular on-chain enforceability. If we keep them together, then we are sure that those principles that are outlined in the, let's say, text part of the Constitution can then also be translated into very effective and enforceable action. So I recommend actually kind of keeping the things together. And then there is also another part of enforceability, which is more related to basically legal actions in various jurisdictions. That actually requires, I think, a dedicated roundtable, because the implications are significant, and it would take a long time to discuss it. It also depends on the legal nature of the Constitution and what does it really mean to be part of the Cardano ecosystem, what from a legal point of view. But I wanted to add something that I think you that guys are so involved in the process maybe don't even notice, and for me that I've been participating also to the workshops and so on, but I'm maybe a bit more external. I see your excitement and I share it. What I'm, let's say, curious to know is if you understand that you are kind of making legal history here. Like, as a lawyer, I can clearly see that. This is a new socioeconomic construct that is based on blockchain technology, ownership of the tokens, interactions via the internet in a peer-to-peer way. But what Cardano is doing, it's really leading the way to potentially many other ecosystems adopting the same sort of approach toward decentralized governance. It's a super transparent process, it's open, everybody can participate, basically. And this is something that it's really, really unprecedented. And when you compare it, even when we worked before the workshop that we did on the Constitution, and we wanted to find some legal precedents and so on, at some point we were looking at the Constitution of states. We were looking at the Congress of the United States of America and what they did back then, because the time in which people reunited and said, now we have to decide what's the rule for a community, are very few in the history of humankind. And the most recent examples are related to revolutions and then constitution of countries. And if you look at other examples in terms of foundations, associations, and so on, there's never been something that is so developed in terms of how the process is structured and so on, or maybe not as developed as what we are doing now. So having this much participation and so on, it's really great. And also, I've looked into the newest draft in comparison with the one of late July, and I already see a lot of improvement. Also, and I don't want to assume merit for that, but I think that in our workshop, some of the suggestions we made are now implemented in the Constitution, so super happy about that. And yeah, I'm very confident that this thing is going to create a lot of value for the ecosystem itself and for whoever in the future will come and build on the Cardano ecosystem. That in the end, they can rely on this Constitution as a guarantee related to the values of openness and transparency that are embodied in this Constitution and in the Cardano ecosystem.
Wow, amazing. So your take is keep the guardrails part of it. All right.
In my view, yes. It's about enforceability, yes.
Enforceability, exactly. Giorgio, I'd love to hear your take on this, Giorgio.
I mean, I found Nicola point to be great. I think what we are doing here, we are landing on a new planet that has been never explored, and we don't know if there's oxygen, if we can breathe, right? And we are coming up with the best strategy for it. And it's really exciting to be part of this journey. So I cannot, undermark this even more. I'm very happy that the community, maybe we are a bit late, but now we are fully awake and we realize that Argentina is next week, and I'm very happy to see all the proposals, the good response that we got to the foundation draft of the Constitution. So it's really exciting.
Thank you so much, dear Giorgio. Beatrice.
Hi. Oh yeah, sorry.
Sure.
Actually, I wanted to echo what Nicola talked about earlier in his remark, that we are, at a moment you start to look at states' constitutions. And I found myself doing that very early in the process because, we are trying to figure out what are we trying to build and what is already out there. And, I'm Norwegian and I love the place that I live in, and I love the way that we've set up our community. And, comparing the constitution that we have today with the Norwegian constitution has been something that has really helped understand the foundations that we're building. But I would actually like to pass the word to Johnny Kelly, who's also in the call today. Hi, Johnny.
Well, hello, everybody. Yeah, speaking about openness and transparency, would I be able to present something at the moment? Would that be okay?
Sure. If you can share your screen, of course.
Yeah, I'll try and do that. Let's see if I can get the right screen. Okay, so let me know if you can see this. Is this available? It says the browser can't access your screen. Try capturing a different screen. See this? Whenever you try and do things without having tested them beforehand, things go horribly wrong. Let's see if I can share it as a window. Does that work? It does.
Yes.
Okay, so what I'm presenting here is something that will help with this openness and transparency on the document itself. This is a community tool that's being worked on at the moment by Mad Orchestra. You'll see at the top that at the moment.
Could you zoom in a little bit? Because it's
let's see if I can live. There we go. Okay, so as you can see at the top, all data will be erased in this version, and it's a test version at the moment. He's going to release it sometime later today, as far as I'm aware, but it might be tomorrow. And what it is a tool for the community to be able to get information about what exactly happened. And speaking to Danielle's point about how there were workshops all over the world and that there are delegates that came out of them, I myself was in the Edinburgh workshop, and I came out as an alternate, which is a traveling person to be a backup to the main delegate, who will be Larissa McFarlane. So she'll be speaking at the convention. And if you find the closest one to you in this list, whenever this tool comes out, you'll be able to find out exactly who your delegate is, their email address, and be able to communicate with them directly. In addition, on this tool, there is a list of all of the community drafts that are available, as was referenced earlier, written in Markdown, so you'll be able to link out. This was the person who spoke earlier, who has collected these together, and you'll be able to click on that and go and find their version. But the one that matters most right now in terms of what's going to happen in the convention next week is the Intersect draft, which has its own link here. I'll just hover on that for a bit so you can screenshot it or look at it later. Yeah. So whenever you're on the Intersect draft, people will be able to log into this, connect their wallet to prove that they're a part of the Cardano community, and read and comment on any part of the latest draft from Intersect that has been made through synthesis workshops. So you'll be able to put your own comment directly there on any of the paragraphs that exist within the document. And this means that it will be a truly open and transparent process, because anyone who has a wallet and has ADA will be able to connect and comment on the actual draft. Now, what I'm hoping will happen is when we get to the convention itself, we use this and look at the comments that have come through. But yes, this is going to be released either today or tomorrow, I think, by Mad Orchestra, and it's something that I think is a highly important thing to get full openness and transparency on the Constitution. Thank you.
Wow, Johnny, this is amazing. Absolutely. I know Adam Dean has just joined the stage, and I'm pretty sure, Adam, you'd love to build further on what Johnny Kelly just presented on. So I'm going to put that in your hands, or not?
Yeah, excuse me. Just waking up here, barely. That was my first sip of coffee when they put me up on screen, so I apologize for that. But good morning, everybody. And yeah, I've been talking to Mad these last few days. Obviously, we had both been really keen to push for the Intersect draft to get published. And then all of a sudden, Cardano Foundation dropped a draft. We were like, oh, goodness, how are we going to now reconcile this as well? And so the idea was, hey, well, we need an actual tool that's easier than GitHub, but similar to GitHub, where people can comment on individual sections of a document. And that's where we came up with this. And to be fair, it's very rough around the edges. It's very AI assisted at the moment because it was all about getting something out in the short term before these conventions. And we thought it was important to coalesce the information as much as possible into one kind of distilled platform, so that the delegates can then go and log in and actually see what their people have been saying and had to say, and what the most important sections are to them. So it's really cool. I was playing around with it yesterday. I've left some comments and then added a bit of feedback about, connecting your wallet, maybe measuring how much ADA is in there, so we have a little bit of civil resistance, so a single bad actor couldn't spin up 500 wallets and make it look like their particular topic of choice is really important to them. But yeah, ultimately, to keep the conversation going, particularly asynchronously, for all the people that can't join all these great calls that we're having. Seems like every day between now and the conventions. So
yeah, wow. Thanks so much, there. Thanks so much, there, Adam Dean, for commenting on that. I do want to go back to Danielle, because Danielle, when we spoke earlier, you mentioned exactly this, basically. That really like coming together as a community and providing that feedback, and how do you really consolidate all of that together. Had you before this any knowledge of this tool, and now this has just been presented? I'm curious to learn your thoughts about this.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think anything the community is doing to better understand what's changed and see the differences as a result of where we started and the community's input along the way is just helpful for the community to see these things changing and evolving. It will certainly be helpful for delegates to also see that sort of thing. So, I mean, what the community is doing right now really can just be seen as net positive.
Okay. Just a question for the entire panel. Anyone can come up. Please feel free, because with such tool that could help when, let's say, for all of the elected delegates and the alternates in Buenos Aires and Nairobi, and helping them consolidate all of that feedback into hopefully one final draft. How should we, as a community now, or you as a panel, contribute to getting the word out? Because obviously, we do want to make sure that we increase participation. We want to get many people that's understanding not only the basics, but while understanding the basics, now getting really involved. So we don't want to be constantly speaking to the same group of people, within the same circles. We want to make sure that it's inclusive. That word was used earlier, I guess, with Jack. You use that word inclusiveness. We want to make sure of that. So, one moment. Before we get to that question, Nicholas Giacomet, I'm so happy you're back.
So let's try this again. Hopefully it works now.
It works.
Thank you. Yeah, technology is not my friend today. For some reason, my headphones just did not pick up, which I guess is a lesson on running technology infrastructure for all of us. I think one of the things that from the pieces I've heard today, which I think is very important, is this idea of accessibility, right? And that was one of the challenges that for us, I think a constitution needs to be accessible both in language and sort of format and style. Because if it isn't, then I think you get exactly this difference in sort of perception of what the Constitution is. Now, obviously, that's never a perfect science, right? You're always going to get significant differences across sort of countries anyway, right? Even geographies within countries. The Swiss can tell you a lot about people disagreeing on the same text of a thing within sort of one system, right, of just 9 million people. So I think that's quite strongly what we base sort of our work regarding the Constitution on. And I also wanted to just say, I know there was some, talk last week, understandably, about sort of how late in the cycle this was. And I do acknowledge that. I think we acknowledge that. The truth is that it was just quite a bit harder than we originally anticipated, which probably doesn't come as a surprise to anyone who's been working on it for the last 5-6 months. And I think at the end of the day, our goal is really to get to something that, is accessible, is understandable for as large an audience as possible, and that we can align on in terms of what this defines this community and this ecosystem. Now, I do want to highlight, just because I am a lawyer, like 2 or 3 things where I think there are some differences between the different constitutions that I think are worth highlighting from our point of view. I think one big one is sort of the scope of the Cardano budget and also how treasury withdrawals work and how open they are. I think there are different viewpoints in the community. I think there are different viewpoints within the drafted versions. And I think that is something that, is pretty critical if you just look at how important the treasury is and how much, ADA is in it, right? I mean, it is a very obvious thing that people are going to want to access. And we do think that that process should be relatively open while ensuring business as usual, right? So while ensuring that the infrastructure itself has sufficient funding to run and to ensure sort of that we keep up effectively with the competition, being the other L1s out there. And I think that to us seems like a minimal viable consensus, but maybe we're wrong. I mean, that's sort of the beauty and the challenge of this journey for all of us, is that it is very different from sort of where we came from. And I think that has been a challenge for everyone. And I think it will continue to be a challenge, by the way. I don't think that's, we're anywhere close to the end of this journey. And I think particularly because we're now looking at the hard fork in January, I think there's going to be a time period between Argentina and the hard fork. And I will say, I think the expectation is from our side that there will be continued, opinions and work streams on the Constitution after Argentina, if only because there is like 6 or 7 or maybe even 8 weeks until we can actually implement it on chain, right? And I think, you all know better than me, I haven't been in the Cardano space for about 2 years, but you all know better than me that this is a very active space, right? It doesn't stand still. People want to move things forward. People want to still change things. And I think one of the challenges is going to be how do we sort of channel that energy, channel that creativity, and that, at the end of the day, positivity, right, into something that actually produces an even better outcome for Cardano. And I think that's sort of, to us, the overarching challenge and the overarching mission here.
Yes. Well, fully agree there. I guess community participation plays a critical role here, right? So I just want to bring that back again. So thank you there. Thank you, Nicholas, for sharing that. How do we really increase community participation? What is key to that? Any thoughts? I'm looking really right now at Einstein.
Sure, I can comment a bit on that. I consider this part of accessibility and making sure our constitution is alive, and that is a topic really near and dear to me. I talked about this in Dubai as well during the Cardano Summit. I think having tools that are very accessible, like for example, GitHub is great, but not everyone is able to understand how to make a commit there and then propose changes. So I really want to congratulate and applaud what Adam Dean and John Kelly is doing with having these tools that are accessible to either holders.
I just want to clarify. I haven't built any of this. This has been Mad Orchestra, Adam Dean. I have just been a proponent of it and pushing for its use. Okay, so I haven't been the coder.
All right, I will
not a dev.
Yeah, but yeah, that lowers the threshold, and the big question is just the sheer volume of all of the feedback. So from the civics perspective, we are a small group and we have a lot of data. We also rely a bit on the delegates having their gathering information and bringing that to the discussion. So what I hope to see is that all of this data gathered is something that we pass on to the delegates to consider, and then that could be part of the debate as well. Because I really think it's important we hear the whole community. And I want to end with one last point, like you said about continuing discussion. The Constitution, the interim Constitution, totally opens up for this. So what it says is that you have to have held a Constitution Convention before end of the year. And then it says you have to submit the governance action before end of January. So there's no limitation in terms of them doing some additional feedback in this space between those two things, because we are fulfilling the requirement of holding that convention. So the last thing I want to say is education material, things like this, making at a level that's simplified. I'm guilty of this. I keep wanting to go down into the technical levels of all of it, but just giving this high level understanding allows people then to be able to contribute and make comments to it. So yeah, I really appreciate that.
Thank you so much there. Thank you so much there, Einstein. Again, if you're joining us live, please, and you have a question that you really like answered, please free to comment and we'll bring your question up. Okay, thank you. Thank you there. Beatrice.
Yes. So for me personally, one of the biggest, to get to the community feedback, we do need community involvement. And I actually wanted to ask Nicholas, because he's been, or you've been hosting a lot of these governance open hours, at least every single week. And I was wondering what your viewpoint is on how we can get the community more involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've not done it every week. I should do it every week, but sometimes, life happens. But I think what's going to be really important now, Buenos Aires is in next, Nairobi and Buenos Aires are in next week. But following that, and just also what Eystein and Nicholas said, what we need to do and continue to do is really keep these conversations going, right? This amazing workshop that Adam hosted on Saturday, things like that. Maybe not 6 hours. That's hard for one person to host that. So, but we need to keep the conversation going, but also in a productive way, right? So that it's not just screaming into the void. People are on a space, people are in a meeting, and then, they just talk, which is good. But we also need to have some outcomes and how to collect the feedback in an organized way, and ideally in an accessible way, so that everybody can see what is being contributed, right? Because if you then see, for example, there's so much feedback about the budget, but no one is talking about Article 3 or, Article 4, then maybe you want to spend more time on that, right? And with a tool, really shout out to Matt Orchestra, that is being built by him and his coalition and with Adam and everyone. I think we need to really highlight these things as an ecosystem. And here I'm also looking at the established entities to really highlight that and share that and give that the proper highlight that it deserves. And for me, how would I also continue the conversation is what comes out of Buenos Aires and the ratification process. I think some people, and I mentioned that previously before, but I think we should talk about that. Yes. Right? We have delegates that have been elected in the workshops all over the world. They're now either traveling to Buenos Aires or to Kenya, to Nairobi, right? And then they continue to deliberate, they continue to draft a document. And then at the end of the day, at the end of this convention, there's going to be a vote where the delegates can then decide if they want to ratify this document that they have created or not, right? So yes, no, I guess they can also abstain, but I guess you want to vote yes or no, right? And then this is the output document from Buenos Aires. And now I assume that we will there will be a document, the delegates will be able to create something like that together and reach an agreement, a majority. Mm-hmm. And then after that happened, right, I think the conversation must continue, because we do not have, the hard fork happens maybe early in January, maybe even a bit later. And that would leave us with this time window between Buenos Aires and the potential hard fork where we can still improve things, right? And I think everyone here that worked on a document, maybe not on a constitution, knows that just 2 more days or 1 more day can really make a difference. So I think we need to channel the productivity and the willingness of these many people here in the community that want to do something, and give them the right venue to do that. That is transparent, that is very open, and it's not just ideally in English, right? Because that is also something very important to me, that we make it accessible in all these other languages that are spoken in the community. Especially Spanish, Japanese, and you name me, even German maybe. But yeah.
Exactly. You mentioned, certain words, like accessibility, and not only you, but multiple panelists here basically mentioned the same. I'm looking really right now at Jack Briggs, from an intersect perspective, right? Can you also explain a bit more what people can expect in the coming week, in Argentina and Nairobi? Because I think it's good for the listeners to also understand, hey, yes, people are not just traveling there, but there's actually a real agenda, So
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Nisha. Two things I want to quickly say then. Firstly is directly to your question. There is a microsite available now, so CardanoConvention.com. You can head there and you can look at the indicative agenda. And I'll stress that it's indicative because we need to see how far we get with the process and how's it looking when we're in person together with the current text that we're looking at. So have a look, CardanoConvention.com. I can't do a plug on here or thank you, whoever was doing that. The second thing I wanted to say was actually about participation in general, because one of the biggest things we've got to do as an entire community is get the delegation levels up. I think we're about 2.4 billion ADA currently delegated to DREPs, and that also includes the auto-abstain DREP as well. So it's not quite a true reflection on delegation to active DREPs, but nevertheless, it's still an active decision to auto-abstain. But we need that number to go higher. You know, we're currently at Project Catalyst levels now, so you could argue that we're at the base, probably the very base level expectations that we can have as a Cardano ecosystem is matching Project Catalyst levels. And I'm saying that again with my personal opinion. I don't know if there's consensus around that, of course, but that's how I feel. Very base level, the minimum expected is Project Catalyst levels. And then we need to look, okay, a bit beyond that and think about what is current. One of the issues we've got globally anyway, right, is just involvement in government, right, and politics. We get low turnout, voter turnouts in most modern democracies. Most people switch off, get extremely disenfranchised. And I think that's what the promise of Cardano and blockchain more broadly brings, is that you don't have to be disenfranchised now. You can actually have a voice. You can raise a governance action directly yourself. For me, the Constitution, when it gets to January time and it's on chain, we want that delegation number to be up, right? We don't want it to be at 2.4. And to be fair, it is organically growing pretty a good rate, I'd say. There is a little carrot and stick thing. So when we hard fork in early January, hopefully, if your staking rewards will still accrue, but you won't be able to withdraw them until you have delegated to a DREP or an auto-abstain, auto-no-confidence option. So that's a little bit of a stick to say, okay, well, I must delegate now because I can't withdraw my staking rewards. And I'm sure we'll see levels increase exponentially from that point. But anyway, for me, when we're voting on the Constitution, I love that 2.4 billion currently to be 5 billion delegated stake. But I think as a community, the next steps for us is to put markers on the map of what numbers do we want to see, what KPIs are we tracking against in terms of governance health. And I know the Civics Committee are looking at this as well, and how do we measure participation, activeness, involvement. And the other thing, actually, just more broadly, it's a lot of stuff to read. I mean, 6 hours on Saturday, Adam, you did that. I mean, fair play to you. I don't know how you find the time, to be honest. And everyone else that joined that call, 30 plus people. That's just that group. But you've got to read this stuff, like, including the guardrails. And most of the guardrails just go over your head, you know, when you read that stuff. And that's fine. But at the same time, we've got to just try to get people in. The first way in is delegate your ADA, start that journey by participating in the system, and then go from there, is what I would say.
Yes. Okay. You also mentioned there's a lot of stuff to read, right? Where are these stuff? I mean, yes, we need to make sure that we're educating people, right? We need some basic understanding. So if you want to increase community participation, if you want to get those numbers up as per a set KPIs, then we clearly have to make sure that we meet the people on their terms. So first question is, where does the community hang out? Where do we meet them? You know, so that we can inform them, you know, what to do, that there are certain actions required. And then secondly, if we want those numbers up, what information do they need? Or can we provide them? You know, how can we, I mean, how can you guys help spread that word? And where can they find the information? Looking at Johnny Kelly.
Yeah, just to quickly say onto that, just briefly, quickly to say is that, you know, Intersect have been doing this right through our communication channels, but just to be clear about our audience, actually, I did a recent poll and looking at some surveys of members. 90% of our members self-declare that they're intermediate or advanced, have advanced knowledge of Cardano. And so we're already talking to people from an Intersect perspective of, on the whole at least, them knowing what to do. They've already either delegated to DREP or they know how to, but they've just not done it yet. And I think our audience at Intersect is, of course, limited in that way, and maybe that's the right thing because we're focusing on core infrastructure, supporting on-chain governance, and that sort of world, those two worlds. So it's like you said, Denisio, it's everybody, right? It's all of the collectives, organizations, institutions, just general individuals all play that role in getting the word out. Yeah. Sorry, Johnny, go for it.
I think a lot of places that Cardano community members tend to hang out would be Twitter Spaces and various different shows that exist across the ecosystem. There's things like Cardano Over Coffee, Epoch's End, there's various NFT projects. Jukebox has many things that get made and talked about. And I think if it would be possible for people who are from Intersect, either the team or the company, to go into those spaces and sort of promote Intersect's process so far in regards to the Constitution. And also, if anyone here in this panel could go into any space and start talking about the Mad Orchestra tool I presented earlier as a means by people to get information, because it will be being updated. I think it will be being updated with guides on the timeline of process for the constitutional ratification, so people can see that in a more, accessible way rather than having to listen to these roundtable spaces recordings. So there'd be a place that people could just be pointed to. And I think the same thing will be happening in regards to delegation to DREPs. There'll be a guide put on there. It's been cobbled together very quickly, like within the last few days. So what's been made so far is concentrating on what's most important right now, which is the constitutional draft that's being decided upon next week. But I think that site is going to expand over time. So in my opinion, going out to the community, going to NFT projects, leaders, going out to spaces and trying to promote what has been going on, and then pointing to the Mad Orchestra Adam Dean website as a means to get information might be a good method.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Absolutely. I do have a follow-up question for that. But before we get to that, let me ask this one here. So is there an argument to be made that due to the low, let's say, DREP delegation, Cardano is or might not be ready for the hard fork?
Oh, that's a good question. I'd be happy to give this. I'd be happy to give this like 20 seconds, or let's see.
Go ahead, Nico.
So from a constitutional standpoint, it does not specify a specific ratio or number of total active supply that has to be delegated to DREPs. Right. So if I consider now the ICC, I put the Cardano Foundation's ICC hat on. And I would say from that perspective, if I assess the constitutionality of a hard fork governance action, right, which the ICC has to do if they do their job right, then there is no threshold that would tell me, yes, this is enough, or yes, this is not enough. There is a thing where it says that I think the safety of the protocol or something like that needs to be justified, right? So maybe from that perspective you could tackle it, but the real decision makers here who need to consider that are the SPOs, the stake pool operators, because they are the ones who are going to vote on the hard fork, not just by updating their nodes, but also by actually voting on the governance action, right? So this is also something that they should consider when they think about the governance action to update for the hard fork. So yeah, that's my take. Happy to hear what someone else thinks.
I mean, so other perspectives, absolutely. Let's see. Johnny, sure, go ahead.
I mean, this is not an official level or anything, but there was a Twitter space a long time ago in which I asked Charles Hoskinson directly what his view of a good amount of delegation to DREPs and the no confidence voting option would be for it to be representative enough. And in his opinion, he stated about 15% of the total amount of stake that exists that could be delegated would be representative enough based on some form of scientific study of like the levels of representation. So if we were going to take some sort of social cue from Mr. Uncle Charlie himself, I think 15% of delegation might be it. Personally, I'd love 30%. Like that's just like a wish list thing for me. But from Charles in a space one day, many months ago, 15%.
Wow. Okay, so 15%. Nicholas, just looking at you there, where are we now, basically? Are we near this 15%?
No, at the moment we're not.
Okay.
But right, ultimately, and I would really like to look at this from the constitutional point of view. What we need to work with currently, it's the interim constitution, right? So yeah, I think this question is really something that the SPOs need to consider, and yeah, and just mindful of the constitutional aspect of this. I would also like to get an understanding of maybe another constitutional committee, interim constitutional committee member from the Atlantic Council, either Adam. What did you guys consider that already?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a topic of consideration for us. I think one of the big things that we've been trying to focus on as the Cardano Atlantic Council is not so much trying to draw a hard line or a hard number, because I think it's, for me personally, more important that we have the people that are actively interested in governance that are participating. Adding people just so number go up doesn't actually get us either a more informed voting base or more active or concerned. So bigger number just for the sake of bigger number may actually be a dangerous line to walk, because that could actually just mean that a large exchange that doesn't have your best interest at heart has now entered the chat. But is that a good thing or a bad thing? So I don't like to draw too much of a hard point on a particular numerical threshold. But obviously, I think right now, 2 billion, it seems a little bit too on the low side for me. So it's definitely a feelings at this point rather than a science is, I guess, the best way to put it.
Yeah. I have a question there, a follow-up question to that. Should this not be part of the Constitution? I mean, if we speak about KPIs and stuff, I'm just a general question.
So that's the interesting part, right? We've already done that a little bit because we've set these thresholds for governance, right? It takes 75% of actively participating people to pass a constitution. It takes 67% to implement, this protocol parameter change. What if we don't get those numbers? What do we do, right? And so if we hard code those numbers and say, like, we can't do X until we have 5 billion ADA, and there's just not 5 billion, there's either not a time now that 5 billion ADA are interested in participating, or a time in the future that we fall below that number, what happens to governance? So again, arbitrarily putting a number out there might actually backfire on us. And that's one of the, I think, the key takeaways that came from my Saturday workshop and a lot of this discussion that we've been having, is that we can't just think about the right now and the historical. We have to also future-proof this thing. And that's where having some flexibility in your language actually maybe makes sense, because a quick example for the panel, a few months ago, we would have said, yes, Cardano should be open and permissionless, and transactions should never be censored or have their fees become unreasonable, until some alleged bad actor started to quote unquote DDoS the blockchain, right? And then all of a sudden, everybody got on board with charging them more fees for their transactions just because they were a different type of transaction. So there's a lot of weird gray areas there that we won't know about until we actually get there. So try not to be too rigid in your interpretation would be my best advice, and try not to paint us into a corner because it sounds like a good idea right now. Try to think about how that's going to be applied in the future.
Yeah, that's a good point there. I was actually thinking on asking the same question to Nicholas Jacomit, and the reason why it's more from a legal stance, from a lawyer stance, how that should be viewed. Should we actually place a hard code, something like that, into the Constitution?
I wouldn't hard code an amount, no, is the short answer. The reason being that if you do that, I think you create, as I think Adam was sort of similar direction to what Adam was saying, you create a very strange incentive structure around that specific number. So I think it's a tricky thing. I think the question is of, in a sense, sufficient support. I mean, look, Switzerland has a long history of direct democracy, right? And the vote, if you look at sort of local elections and state elections, you often get only 15-20% uptake, right? and nobody ever questions the validity of it, because the notion is basically if you don't participate, then you may be in it for a different reason, and I think that's fair, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of people in blockchain that are in it for the gains, for the potential to make money. They are the ones that create liquidity on exchanges. Whether you like, sort of in a moral or an ethical sense, that piece of the space or not, is basically irrelevant. They are part of the space, and I think you probably won't get that much governance participation from that side of the equation potentially, but I think that's okay. I don't think we should be aiming for 60-70% governance participation. And I'm actually kind of optimistic. I think I'm with Jack in the sense that I think, going into the hard fork, I do think it's going to change enough that I think you're going to get sufficient, validation of sort of the position. And remember, I mean, we can change this stuff, right? As has been noted before, all of this is subject and open to change. So what we really have to make sure is that just what we have is at least sort of functional and understandable for people that are joining the governance space from the outside. I think that's key, because if we don't achieve that, then I do think you're kind of locking the existing power structure for potentially a very long time.
Wow. I actually agree with you guys, I must say. Beatrice. Oh, you're muted, Beatrice.
There we go. Yeah, I actually wanted to ask, because Adam mentioned something about keeping the community informed, and DREPs are going to play a big role in this moving forward. So we have a DREP on the stage. Ryan, how do you plan to keep your community informed moving forward?
Thanks. Yeah, so I guess one of the first ways to do it would be to join roundtable discussions and workshops, kind of like this one. People can hear you speak and kind of hear your opinions and give feedback on your thoughts. There's also, be active on social media. You can share with your delegates on X the Everything app. There's a bunch of community-oriented tools like VibrantNet's Reach Your People, 1694.io. A cool one I found out about last night, I think that Yuta shared, is tempo.vote, which actually also includes your vote history. And then, it's important to, when you do go to vote on things, to put a good rationale for your voting, to explain your thought process of why you voted yes or no or abstain. And I even actually back those up to your GitHub, or my GitHub, and other people could do similarly, or IPFS or other types of permanent storage. So just be active in the community, share your thoughts, and allow people to give their feedback. And I think it's important that people actually have time. Like if you're going to vote a certain way and they don't like how you vote, they have time to switch their delegation, right? And that was one of the main features we baked into how governance works. And I think even actually a DREP can change their vote. Like if I voted no on something, and then after some discussion happens, I think I can resubmit my vote and change it to yes. So it's very important to have that back and forth discussion in the social circles. That's correct.
That's correct. Guys, I'd love to bring this, let's say, back to the Constitution, because obviously, in just a few days, this massive event is going to be taking place in Argentina and also Nairobi. So in terms of the tools that we have, because we do want to make sure that we increase the level of, let's say, community participation, how are we going to make sure in just a few days, this tool that was just created and presented by Johnny Kelly several minutes earlier, that the word of this tool gets out? How are we going to do that? What are the plans? I'm going to look to you, Jack, because I'm pretty sure that you guys have been working on a plan for that.
Yeah, well, there's no. I don't want to take away anything from Manuel Christo, so it's definitely all of his efforts, along with Adam and everyone that's participated in that. So I'm just going to retweet the hell out of it and add no comment apart from check it out. Because it's his tool. He's done a really good job at it. Thank you, Johnny, for sharing that. I just tweeted him back actually, because it's sick. It's very good.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, we'll do that because I think it's just important. We've got a really good opportunity. I mean, broadly speaking, actually, just back one step. The document, if we look at it now, is pretty good. Right? It's very good. It captures 99, maybe 98.7% of what the areas are, and there's some words in there that I think Johnny mentioned to me yesterday on a Twitter space, that I think Adam as well, where there's risk attached to particular words and definition of those words. That's really interesting. I think those are things I'd like to pick up. Go, sorry
to interrupt you, Jack, but just specifically the word expected. The word expected that appears multiple times in the document is one that causes a bit of consternation, worry about what that could potentially mean if there's an expectation in the document. Now, sometimes that would be justified, but other times there's some argument to be made that it might create something of a danger. But that's to be discussed in Argentina, and I don't want to put my bias into it, but I just wanted to highlight the word you're talking about is expected.
Yeah, or reasonable, right? That's another one.
Reasonable or unreasonable, yeah.
Yeah. No, and this is all great, and this is exactly what the whole point of the convention is. Next week we've got to talk about this stuff and get a document that we're happy with. And I said this on the space yesterday, so I'm repeating myself a little bit, but for me, how I'm going to be looking at it and how I'm going to be delegating my ADA to a DREP, my choice for voting on this constitution for me, is that the DREP looks at it in two ways. One, the text as it is, the binary ones and twos, what is written in that document. Do I like it or not? Does it make sense to me? Does it represent the ethos of Cardano that I know and embody? That's number one. Second one is how much social consensus is built into this process, so I know that it is also reflective of the broader ecosystem. And if those two things are achieved by the convention throughout this process, that we've only got a week to go. So as you say, Dionisio, it's a week to go. It's not long. But if we can get to that point where we're happy in sort of the good enough and perfection is the enemy of good type thinking, then I'm happy with whatever outcome comes, right? I mean, I'd like to hopefully get a great constitution that we can vote on in January. But again, it's up to the community. And that's how I'll be looking for my DREP to support whatever constitution we end up voting on.
Exactly. Thanks, Jack. Utah, is Utah with us still? Oh, hi. Yes, Utah's there. Utah, from the perspective of the Japanese community, right? What would you say what would you say the level of participation is?
About Japanese community, maybe there are very so low participation about constitution discussion. So, and I think it would be useful to have guide providing the background to each article and section of the draft constitution, because maybe it's very difficult to understand why this section and article are adopted by subcommittee. For example, for me, it's very difficult to understand. So constitution allow us to build organization. It's written in constitution draft, but I don't understand why constitution should allow to build organization, because I can build organization very so maybe it's important to provide the background of each article and section. So if not, maybe it's very difficult for Japanese community and maybe another community to discuss about about draft constitution.
Mm-hmm.
This is my 2 cents. Thank you.
Well, this is Utah. Thank you so much for sharing this. I'm gonna look now at, I think, back to you, Jack. Have we considered, because this is super valuable feedback, saying that we have these drafts, we have these sections within the drafts, but there's nothing really to help understand what that really means. So, and the Japanese community apparently really would have liked to have a guide to help them through the draft. Did we, in some previous session, before we actually get to where we are, considered consulting different communities and, hey, what's really important to you?
Yeah, and I think, a couple of things on that. There is actually a explainer education materials now available on our knowledge base that helps you read and understand the different sections of the Constitution. So if you jump onto the Constitution main knowledge base page that we've got, there is some education material to read alongside the drafts. But to be fair to you and everyone else, that is only a recent publication, so I'm not going to try and put the wool over people's eyes. That only came out a few days ago. So yeah, I think, and it's a very fair point about translations. It's one of the biggest. I mean, Juta's been fantastic. Juta, you've been a hero, man. You've been doing the translations across so many different pieces of documentation over the years. So thank you to everybody. And I know you have a team as well, and a lot of big community there that have been doing that work as well. So a big shout out to everybody. And yes, it's definitely an ongoing challenge. Translations. We lead with English, and we often think, okay, job done. English is out, but that's just clearly not fair or accurate. So there's lots more to do with language work. I would say though that the Civics Committee, and I think can probably back me up on this, has been Jutta as part of the Civics Committee as well, and also an ICC member. And so there's lots of collaboration throughout this process, factoring in those different regions. And of course, the workshops themselves speak to that too, right? 63 different workshops all over the world. So that there's evidence and empirical way that how we've involved multiple regions, which has actually been the biggest challenge, I think, for this whole process. Coming up with a constitution that makes sense for us as a global community is one hell of a challenge. But yeah, noted, Denisio. It's a very good point.
Yeah, I also saw Adam. You had your hand raised.
Yeah, this has been a very important and near and dear topic to my heart, having been around the world, everywhere from Japan in March, and then to Europe and Dubai and South America. And usually I don't speak the language, right? So I just go in there and I'm kind of relying on somebody's goodwill to serve as a translator, like Yuta-san. Thank you so much for being my translator when I was in Japan. But we do have this kind of English, Anglo-centric view of the world. But I think that's why it's so critical, and why I'm so critical of having excessive words in the Constitution, because it makes the lawyers feel good. No offense, Nicholas. But the lawyers like lots of words, but it's very hard to translate those in a lot of situations. And so actually boiling it down and having fewer words makes a lot of sense. And having some of those kind of prescriptive rights, I guess, if you will, in the draft document that don't seem to need to be there. If we have a simple clause that says anything that's not forbidden by this document, you're allowed to do, right? Then as long as we're not forbidding you from forming an organization, which why would we, then you are allowed to do it explicitly, so we can capture a lot of that without saying that you're expected to have a code of conduct or you're expected to form an organization, and just say, you know what, this is an open and shout out to the Cardano Foundation draft. Because I did a little bit of analysis last night on the Cardano ministry while we were talking Constitution. The current Intersect draft does not use the word permissionless at all. That word does not appear in the current Intersect draft, but it is in the Cardano Foundation draft, that we are an open and permissionless ledger. So things to think about. Let's get rid of the legalese and make it simpler for people, particularly those that are not English first speakers, to translate and understand without needing additional documents and an extra 39 pages to explain why the hell it's in there in the first place, right? That shouldn't be the way we're building. Simplest, openest, and most permissionless as we can possibly be. Thank you.
Thank you there, Adam Dean. I like the way that word simplicity kind of keeps, coming back. I'm going to give this back to you, Nicholas. I'm pretty sure you'd like to respond. You're muted again there.
There's too many Nicholases on these calls. It's very confusing, generally. Do you mean me or do you mean Nicholas C?
I meant you, sure.
I mean, look, I think in terms of simplicity, what we were trying to do with our draft was actually, simplify things. One of the ways you can do that without losing too much context and content is to break things into smaller bite-sized chunks, right? Which is part of what we were trying to do structurally, alongside things like, providing an index, which I know takes away from, we realize that sort of takes away a bit. It makes it look a bit more like a contract and a bit less like sort of a foundational document of a nation state. But on average, I would rather have more sort of clarity, hopefully, and more alignment on what things mean than sort of have something that looks more like sort of a nation state constitution. I think we have to recognize that this is not a nation state, right? I mean, some people have called it a network state. To me, it's a bit different. To me, I think I see it more as the foundational rules for a permissionless decentralized infrastructure and how you then govern basically those rules, right? So it's rules about making rules largely. There's obviously a bit more in there, and I think for that, it needs to be as approachable as possible. And there are a lot of ways we could cut down on the word count even further. But at the same time, I think we have to balance that with covering our bases. I mean, one of the things that we found is missing from the current draft that Intersect put out is this notion of describing what the constitutional roles actually are, like going through them point by point, role by role. Because if you don't have that, we realize that it's all implemented on chain, right? Everybody acknowledges that. But if you're coming at this from the outside and you want to understand how the pieces fit together and you don't find that anywhere, I think that's a real challenge for anybody sort of approaching it with, without the knowledge of what SIP 6094 was, right? For example. So it was interesting as well, and this, I'll finish there, right? There were a few things that this is part of the reason it took longer than we expected. There were a few things in there where we actually discovered discrepancies, or at least things that I think could be easily misunderstood between SIP 6094, the interim draft, and sort of the final or the draft of the final constitution, right? So I think that shows you that this is a very, very challenging thing to get right.
That's true. Johnny Kelly. Sure, I see you.
Yeah, I just want to go off the back of what was just said by Nicholas, that whenever we were doing the 6R call a couple of days ago, that was something that I noticed from the foundation draft, was it was much better at defining the exact rules of governance. Sorry, not government. People argue about that. But the exact rules of SPOs, DREPs, and different specs of the from 1694 SIP. I was very pleased to see that it was well defined and actually laid out that way, and that's something that I think would be good to copy across to the main one for the convention. And then the other thing was the glossary of terms, because as you say, people from different languages may not know what words that are in the document actually mean. So having a section in the Constitution that defines that very clearly is a very good thing to add. So I would hope that if we take anything from the foundation draft, we take the glossary of terms and maybe properly define them, and the description of how the system works. Yeah, and if you want to, I've done a little bit of back of the envelope calculation of how much ADA is currently represented in governance. I can do that later if you want.
Sure. Thank you. By the way, if you're joining us live, thank you all really for commenting and for engaging. It really helps, And if you have any questions, last minute question that you'd like to add, please do so. I'm just going to really work towards wrapping up this roundtable talk at this moment. And I'm going to look at, excluding Nicholas and Beatrice, any of the other panels. Is there any final, let's say, last words or anything you'd like to share with the community that you feel is most important from your perspective? Of course, about the Constitution.
Can I go first?
Sure.
I think one of the most important things for me right now is that we have to involve the DREPs in the coming weeks and months, and in the process. We have a lot of DREPs who have a lot of delegates or delegation who I would like to encourage to keep your community informed and to be a part of the conversation. And I understand that it's hard because a lot of people are doing this on the side. So if we can all give them a helping hand and just say, you know what, we're all in this together, but we all have to make sure that our community understands what is going on and also where we're going, and give them as many tools as possible for them to understand where we're going. So that's my that's my last few words.
Yeah, thank you so much, Beatrice. Indeed, engaged. Adam, any last words? Anything you think that's important?
I mean, the important thing is to go out, read these drafts, read as many of the drafts as you possibly can, and give feedback. Make your voice heard somehow, some way, right? Mad Orchestra and I obviously were feeling frustrated and came up with a whole new little micro website to try to gather that feedback and give it to people. and hopefully it'll be useful, right? We haven't launched it yet, so fingers crossed, but it seems like it's getting a lot of interest. But make your voice heard, find out who your local or regional delegate is, and talk to them and ask them what they're going to do in Buenos Aires or in Nairobi when it comes time to the convention. Like, how do they feel about, and just have these conversations, and participate when and where you can, because having these talks openly, publicly, is not only the best kind of disinfectant to feel like everybody is having a chance to participate, but this is peer review, right? Because we are all equally members of the Cardano community, ADA holders, all these different terms that are defined in our various drafts. It's on us now, and you have as much voice as anybody else when it comes to kind of reviewing these documents. So make it work for you by getting involved and participate.
Well, agree. Einstein, anything you'd like to share before we close?
Transparency. I'm so glad we have thing out there. I think the community has done a great job in trying to get access to these documents and to be engaged in that debate. And now it's as one person on the civics committee, I can guarantee you what's on my mind is to ensure that the delegates and the people who have the information are able to have the best possible discussion there in Argentina, and that we accept that the discussion doesn't stop at Argentina, but it's going to continue, and we're going to push this and make it as good as we can until we publish the governance section.
Wow, amazing. All right, let's see. Johnny.
I'm going to do that thing I teased, and I'm going to present my back of the envelope calculation, if that's okay. Let's hope it goes right this time. If I pick the right window and go straight to it, it should work first time. Oh, different window, different screen. Here we go again. Let's see. Present, share screen. That's the problem, isn't it? Every time you try and do a demo, it never works. Well, I can just read it. So I've been writing it down. We're looking at about 2.2 billion total ADA delegated to any governance option, including abstain. Out of that, 700.9 million is delegated to abstain, so that gets taken out of the total active stake. And then if we take the total circulating figure of 37,392,000,000, etc., from pool.pm and minus them off each other and get a percentage, we end up with 4.0623466628% of all circulating ADA currently represented in governments. That's 4.06 to round it up. So we're below the 15% social stated amount of 15% by Charles.
Yeah. Okay. Of course, we've spoken about that in ways of how we can get those numbers up. Basically, we can really encourage the community to participate in governance and delegate their stake basically to a DREP. Before we move on, Ryan, I'd love to hear from you. Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we hit all the big stuff. It was worth rehashing. I guess I see three big things, right? The first is to gather all the voices and the feedback, right? The second one is to synthesize all those voices on the Constitution, and then the third one is to make sure that you're delegating your ADA as voting power to a DREP of your choice, right? So we got to encourage participation in all three of those things. So make sure you're talking to your DREP, you're talking to your constitutional delegate. Make sure you're sharing the tools and the feedback forms, and then make sure you've delegated your voting power. So as long as we're doing those three things, I think we're going to be fine.
Amazing. Clear. Who haven't we?
Yeah, just a super quick. Oh, sorry, Nico. Go for it.
Yeah, no, I really just want to echo what Ryan and also Johnny said, and maybe to just quickly, because I think it's very important to repeat the core message a few times. A few of us probably agree with that. So what's going to happen in Argentina and in Nairobi next week? Right, delegates from all over the world come together. They're going to work together with the civics committee and with everyone there to support them, right? But they are in the driver's seat. The delegates, they are the decision makers there. They're working there then to establish a draft of the Constitution. And then at the end of the convention, they will vote on that. I think with the Clarity tool, I think there's actually an on-chain vote where the delegates then vote, just the delegates, on this draft. If they approve it, yes or no, right? And then ideally we have, let's assume we agree there's a majority and we have a ratified draft from the convention. But then, right after that, to update the constitution on chain, we actually need to put forward this updated constitution draft via a governance action, and that is the update constitution governance action. So and it's a bit confusing, but that is a difference. So whatever is ratified at the convention in Buenos Aires and in Nairobi, that still then needs to be put through a governance action, so through this governance model that we're now implementing, and it needs to be approved by the DREPs and the Constitutional Committee. And then, right, once that's done, and there is a threshold of 75% of the registered DREPs, what Johnny mentioned before, right, 75% of that active voting stake needs to vote yes on that. So this is what's then happening. And as Einstein mentioned that, I think this has to happen until the 31st of January, which means in theory, right after the convention and until the 31st of January, we have quite some time when that can happen, right? And in that time, I think, and probably some of you agree, right, it would be really important to consider how can we still improve it, how can we, with the delegates together, with not just everyone together, how we can make this the best constitution possible, right? Perfect is out of the question, that will never happen, but how can we create the best for us as a community?
Exactly. Jack?
Yeah, super quick. I'm trying to echo everything Ryan said, but I won't actually echo it because he said it already. But perfect call to actions. Nico, thank you for explaining that. It's really important to be clear on that, so that's a good shout. The in between that gap between the convention ending and when we vote on a governance action to update the constitution, there will be a hard fork, and so that's going to unlock the final features of our on-chain governance. So, and we're not sure what the name will be. We'll see how that vote is taking place at the moment, but I suspect it will be changed. We'll see. And I just wanted to quickly call out on what you can expect at the convention next week. So as we know, Buenos Aires and Nairobi are the two locations. There will be a live stream available. We're just working through the logistics of that, of course, and getting all the tech up and ready. There was also an open day on the Friday, December the 6th, in Buenos Aires, where anybody local or traveling to Argentina that's not a delegate or alternate can RSVP to join that open day on the Friday. So CardanoConvention.com is your spot to find all that info out. But ultimately, we want to sort of put a big spotlight on the convention next week, both in Nairobi and Buenos Aires. And it's going to be exciting.
Wow, amazing. The road ahead of us is not always certain, right? But one thing is for sure, that is that if we would like to have or make this a success, community participation is essential. Making, let's say, everything accessible for community, providing them with the right tools, if it's one or multiple, is also essential. I want to thank all of the panelists today who came up, even the ones who are not here. My co-host Beatrice, who connection is broken, unfortunately, for participating, but also for you who've joined in live today and asked questions, have interacted with others through the chats. That's all meaningful. Thank you all. But let's not let the conversation just end here. Let's continue the conversation. Let's try to encourage more people to join in. And as Utah said, let's try to keep it also as simple as possible, because, not everyone would speak the legal jargon. Not everyone would understand the Constitution from a technical perspective. But one thing is for sure, if we simplify the message, the people, the common ADA holder, would be able to understand it. And through understanding, that potentially could increase participation. Johnny, last, please.
Yeah, just off the back of all of that, what I'd like to say is if a ratification governance action went up on chain today, it can't. But if it did, we would currently have 75% of 4.06% of the total amount of potentially delegated ADA representing ratification of the Constitution. So if you do care in this call, and if you do actually want to say yes, no on the draft that comes out of the convention, then delegate to the DREP that votes in your direction when that governance action appears. Yes or no, or abstain if you just want to participate but want to stay away from making that decision. But the point is, if you can delegate to a DREP that represents your view when the governance action actually goes live, then we'll have as much representative, actively interested ADA as possible, and hopefully raise it above that 4.06%.
And real quick on the back of Johnny saying that, to mention what Indy commented on the X live stream, don't forget you can also register as a independent voter and vote for yourself too. So you don't just have to delegate, but get involved and make your voice heard one way or another. So thank you guys.
That's correct. Thank you all. And thank you for joining us live today. Until the next time.